Farr was returned to the front to fight at the Somme. There he felt his nerves giving way once again. In September 1916, he broke down and refused to go up the line to the trenches at Guillemont. He was charged with cowardice and court-martialed in October. At the court-martial, Farr defended himself.
I reported to the Sergeant Major and told him I was sick and could not stand it. He then said, "You are a sodding coward and you will go to the trenches. I give sod all for my life and I give sod all for guns and I'll get you sodding well shot."
When he was court-martialed, I think it was because he refused this time to actually go over the top. Not because he didn't want to fight, I'm sure of that, because he'd been out in France for 2 years, but because he didn't want to, he just couldn't face the gunfire, and he just felt so traumatised by it all that he just couldn't face it. He said himself in his own defence that when he was away from the gunfire, he felt all right.
The fact that Farr had spent 5 months in hospital in 1915 with shell shock and had been in and out of dressing stations since that time with nervous problems was not admissible during the trial. He had no other defence. Hera Farr was found guilty of cowardice. The court-martial lasted only 20 minutes.
The charge of cowardice seems clearly proved. The man is definitely bad, to say the least of it. I therefore recommend that the sentence be carried out.
Mother received a letter from the War Office stating that my father had died and that he had been shot for cowardice on October the 18th, 1916. And that was all. No apology, no nothing, just a letter. And she says she has told us since that she was so shocked. She had a blouse on at the moment, and she pushed this letter down in between the blouse, and she never told a soul.
Shortly after receiving the letter, Mrs. Farr got some solace from her vicar, who had been contacted by the padre attending the execution.
There was a padre there that stood there and watched my father when he was shot. And he said my father stood there open-eyed, refused a blindfold, and he said he was no coward, he was a very brave soldier.
The shame of his execution remained with Gertrude Farr for the rest of her life. She kept it secret until shortly before her death at the age of 99. Shell shock was not a problem confined to the British trenches. All armies faced the problem of weeding out malingerers and treating genuine cases. Yet as the war progressed, treatments improved. German doctors favored hypnotism. This German soldier is being treated for extreme and continuous shaking. In France, a different type of therapy was used. It was called Faradization, after the Englishman Faraday, who discovered electricity. Currents of electricity were applied to the affected areas and produced remarkable results. Faradization quickly caught on in Britain. At the forefront of the treatment was Dr. Louis Yeeland.
The basis of my father's treatment was to convince the patient that they were not deaf, they were not mute, or as the case may be, they were not paralyzed. And I suppose he did this in two ways, one by talking, and secondly by demonstrating that the patient could speak, could hear, or could move a limb with various techniques such as electrical stimuli.
As with the French, electricity stimulated the nerve endings. proving to the patient that his paralyzed limbs or vocal cords could and would work. Almost all those treated were cured, for the time being at least. Dr. Yeeland's use of electricity was so effective that he was regarded as a miracle worker. In his memoirs, he recalls the case of A1, a private aged 24, so traumatized by 3 years of combat that he was mute. For 9 months he had not spoken a word. Finally, the patient was sent to Yeeland, who locked the surgery doors and placed an electric probe in his throat.
I said firmly to him, "You will leave the room when you are speaking. You are already doing splendidly, and I am satisfied that you are now determined to talk, and I'm very pleased with you." I firmly held him in the chair and said to him, "It is getting late. I may have to use a stronger current."
One must remember at the time, the aims of treatment were partly to get patients better as quickly as possible in the hope that some would be able to return to duty, and long periods of psychoanalysis would not achieve that aim. I mean, the alternative was, if these patients didn't get better, they might spend the rest of their lives as invalids.
I then applied shock after shock to the posterior wall of the pharynx, commanding him each time to say "ah" in expiration. I continued with the Faradism until he could repeat "ah" distinctly, and I did not discontinue its use until he was able to repeat any letter or any word I ordered him to say. When he was able to repeat the days of the week, he became very pleased. "Doctor, doctor, I am champion," he said.
Confidence in the ability to cure the most difficult cases was growing. No matter how extreme the physical symptoms, British doctors felt able to meet the challenge. In 1917, a charismatic new doctor arrived at the Royal Victoria Hospital, Arthur Hurst. He favored hypnotism. His treatment had dramatic results. Hurst looked after some of the men filmed here and kept detailed notes of their progress. Corporal Anderson had developed a curious walk after falling ill in Salonika. Dr. Hurst wrote,
He found he could not walk owing to the pain, but he could get along by a sort of dancing gait in which he slid each foot backwards about half a pace every time it touched the ground. I explained to him that the gait, which had at first been the means of saving him from pain, had now become a bad habit, and that he must now try and cure himself by copying every movement I made when I walked. By the next morning, greatly to his delight, he was walking quite normally, and now found it difficult to reproduce his old dancing gait.
but some men were so deeply troubled by their experiences, they were beyond help.
Some of the sisters had a birthday, and they said it was a pity they had no drink. And one girl said she would get on her bicycle and go down and get a bottle of something, I don't know what. And when she was coming back, she heard a sort of coughing noise, and she thought, I'd better go and investigate what that is. Halfway she thought, oh no, it's a sheep or something. However, she did go over, and when she went over, she found that man had cut his throat. She had a petticoat on, a pair of scissors, and she bound him up as well as she could, and then she got on her bicycle and went back to the hospital. He was put on a charge, I suppose. He was in bed and his hands had to be outside the bedclothes all the time. And there was one probationer there they had to make do with what they had. And she was locking with one of the orderlies, and she took her eyes off the man, and he put his he had a tracheotomy done, and he put his hand and pushed his finger down, pushed his tube down the throat, died. Carelessness. Distressing. Very distressing sometimes. Did what you could for them, diverted them perhaps was probably most of what you could do. And I was very young, I was only 24. I hadn't all the knowledge or the wisdom that I should have had.